Okay, remember, if all practically possible, you want to go through the front door. So you don't just click on the file. The front door means going through the DOT. That's not the be-all, end-all. It doesn't have to always be done, but there's a set of settings there that make things work. So I'm going to do that. Go through the front door. You have two front doors, the DOT, and then you have the standard AutoCAD install. Learn to start to write batch files that actually bring in the right setup and setup drawing. It's pretty much why we're introducing you to scripting. So I'm going to go here and hit and get this to the right size now that fits in that window. So you're hit here, you're going to go File, and hopefully you won't recognize the work, but Open, and you're going to kind of go out to where you want to be. Right, not there, not there, not there. You want to make sure that you know where you want to go, and you want to go to, in fact, your H drive, unless you're working on the K drive, but you got to be very aware. Be careful of running right off a flash drive. I'm sure it does work, but that can slow things down and cause some issues potentially. We're going to go here to an example project. And I'm half testing and half working here. You have a project called 4606 December 1st, and I'm going to go ahead and just erase some things out here so we're not working necessarily in. Right, so you have what you've got laid out here is the way the project kind of should look when you want to get to a point and start to do your changing your corridor. So this is my corridor, and then there's some kind of work done on there. The corridor is already defined, but you can now go back to corridor and turning everything on, thawing everything, or going to corridors here and realizing they're around. You've got to learn to turn everything on, minus layer, thaw, star, on, star, unlock everything so you can get your corridor. Corridors are best done by grabbed. You can then go from that corridor. If in fact you have that corridor, you can go ahead and go to corridor properties, and you can start adding regions. So I'm here in that corridor. It was a delivered corridor. You have the sense that there's almost always a region at the very beginning, at the very end, but you probably want to have figured out now where, in fact, your edges of where you want to change the corridor and make a region there. And so you can see you don't necessarily have to be exact. You can go to here, and then you can just say right click and then split the region, and then kind of click right in here someplace around there, and then you can go down on the other side some pass beyond where you're going to go and finish them off, and now you've got another region. And at that point you can start to see how you can highlight different regions. Different regions will highlight. So if you go through here and you're zooming out through, you should get what you need to know, and you can kind of go ahead and null them out if you need. So we were someplace right in the middle of this thing, 151. We got the end here, so we're probably here. Very quickly, it's a good idea to immediately kind of put that null assembly there. Hit OK. Hit OK. And you kind of get this in your brain. Okay, and I got something to do inside of here. Once again, knowing what's going on, where the road is going to actually go off of what's standard is important. So putting a label, making sure your drafting is very good if you can, and that's what we're going to cover here now. So this kind of sense that when these lines come in together, they get trimmed out and the like. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and go start to finish. I'm going to go ahead and isolate that layer start to finish on what the general process is on some of these things and kind of points laying around and whatever you have. I'm going to go ahead and do some layer isolating here. Lay ISO. The command lay ISO is a kind of important command because you also want to have the settings set to be off, and then you can click on here. You isolate that layer and you can kind of get rid of everything you want. So in this case we had a cul-de-sac up there, we had a bunch of other work, so I'm going to get rid of it now. So there's nothing there in this drawing. Right. And you can see that this was in fact a intersection design. I will leave the cul-de-sac on out here because there was something probably already tied to it. And I'm going to go here, E cross, and then turn everything back on with the unisolate. Uniso is probably not the command, but you're going to have to then right-click on any toolbar, brings up a set of toolbars. It's the layers and layers tool that you're looking for. I'm looking around the screen. I see I've got the XREF up here, and I'm looking around. So what I tend to do is, there it is right here. So we're going to unisolate, uniso. And I'm going to also then minus layer, thaw, star, on, star, and you've got that. All right, so now you've got, in effect, so a bunch of line work around. You've got one edge of pavement that seems to be there. Your corridor is kind of screwed up. What you want to do when you're doing this is make sure you get some good 2D line work on a layer. So we'll leave it on the zeroed layer, and the best thing to do is then learn to use point filter. So I'm going to do that here. We probably could turn some other things off by using the layer freeze. You really would like to get down to a point where all you generally have is that alignment there. You could do a lot of other things, but learning now to do, if you're along a line, or otherwise an arc, and then shift right click, point filters, .xy, shift right click, near to there, Z of 0, and then you're going to do it again, shift right click, point filters, .xy, shift right click, near to there. You can see it doesn't ask for a Z, and then you need one more point on the arc. It would make some sense, I guess, to go all the way to the PC, but that's probably too much work sometimes. .xy of the end of the arc. I'll go ahead and do that this time. And you notice that you have an arc that's perfect there. And it should. You want to double check that you didn't grab the wrong lines. You can do the same thing out here now. Line from the end of here. And you can then go to the center. It's a great idea to never lose your centers. And now you're kind of at the point where you can isolate everything. The one thing you don't necessarily have then is the center line of what your intersecting road is, which might be around. And so you can do a line from the node. Remember that you don't need the 3D snaps because all the alignment work is down at 0 anyway. And then we're going to go, you've got a lot of nodes around, so we're going to go back to the node here and see whether that took. It looks like it did. We don't really know. It didn't because it grabbed the wrong node. You can learn to grab these things, move them around, kind of jump in and see if you can find, right click the node of that, and I don't think it's going to find it. So you got all these other nodes floating around, so maybe you could go to here, or you could go to the shift right click, the intersection. That can get very, very tight in here. The reality is you have all that alignment work. You could have just figured out station and offset from here and put a point directly there. That said, you've got some work that's on a layer. You can now isolate that layer. And so you can now go back to lay ISO. And you're kind of at the point where you want to be, with one exception. You want to probably extend that down through. And realistically, line from the endpoint there to the endpoint, or to the endpoint. Now, this is where, in fact, discussion of your other classes can come involved. You know, you really would like to have marked out where your high points and low points and everything else are along this curve, so you get this idea of sight lines. Again, with the vertical constraints, some, these sight lines, vertical or horizontal, you'd like to mark this out. We're going to make the assumption that it's all clear, and you're going to now realize you have a center line there, and you're going to start designing your road. So you look out at the DOT, a B2, B1, some sort of intersection. You have to realize that you're going to then eventually, you want to have done your horizontal design relatively well. You don't want to be shifting the horizontal design. The vertical you can do a lot with. So you can start thinking now of the main road being 12, 24-foot offset. So I'm going to do both sides. Offset 12. There's 1, there's 2, there's 1, There's 2. So smartly at some point you can change the color on these things in the short term so you can keep track of them. The red, I'll grab the edge of pavement. Things that you usually don't do, you could put them on different layers. You're just kind of designing, however. And then I'll put my final edge of pavement out here on the green. Same thing with this. This coming down through, I'm going to be mine a little bit different than what I expect yours. I'm going to offset 12 on either side. However, I'm going to add a turn lane on this as well. Offset 12. And I'm going to literally have a little bit of a taper in here as well. So I've got offset, offset, 12, 12. I'm going to offset 12 here as well. Same thing bit there. We're going to taper down through. So I'm going to take this and this. And I'm going to put them on green. I'm going to take this and this and make them yellow. These are for just visual. And this I'm going to put as red. You can put things on correct layers, but if you're on this kind of Z, you're a little bit more free. Now I'm going to go ahead and design this first part and then kind of design some stuff through. Remember that things work great if you break. Things work great if you break. So I'm going to go here. Typically the fillet coming in is a radius of 60. Check the DOT. The radius coming out is a fillet. There's a radius of 40. These are design numbers. That's why you have intersection design. Radius of 40. I've got those kind of lined up. Those things are through. In the end, we would have some sort of lane here. You can start doing things like line from shift right click perp 2. Offset T for through the endpoint. And then let's say I wanted to have staging of cars of 50 feet, offset 50, and then I'm going to have a 100-foot taper, offset 100. Extend, screw that, push that one in. Now you've got a line that goes from the intersection there to the intersection here, and you've got your taper there. In all reality, then you don't need anything beyond here. This probably then turns out to be green. So this is much easier done sometimes, right? And in the end, much easier done by just AutoCAD drafting. So I'm doing it fast here. Obviously, it takes longer than this for most, but I'm going to go ahead and just leave it something like that, and the other side the same. Now that we've got now here, it's a little bit more difficult because this kind of concept of along a curve, you can't just use the offsets, but what you can do is you can use a measure command. So, and there's all kinds of different ways to do this, but measure is really a block command, but you can use it as well. I'm going to measure that with a segment length. Of this case, I'll make it 200, right? And then when you realize is you have a node line from the node, it should have put a node right there, right? And you can typically, again, go perpendicular to the center is probably a good idea to throw a bunch of lines down to the center. You probably, at some point there, you want to get rid of your extra lines, though. In many cases, you're fine. You want to go then maybe a 150-foot taper. You can go ahead and trim. Be careful of the trims, how, because you want it all the way through. You learn to do a lot of breaks. And then trims. Right, and then finally I'll do my measure, MEASURE, object to measure this, length of 150, and then line from the node of looking for that node that catches, and then you're going to go in this case to the intersection that you had back here, and you're relatively good. Thanks for listening. We'll finish up in the next video.